My name is Alyssa Norris. I'm originally from North Pole, Alaska, and I'm attending Washington State University, where I'm studying civil engineering and ethics. And today I'll be talking to you about affordable, reliable, and responsible energy for rural America. So for my presentation, we'll kind of be giving an overview of myself and why this is important to me, as well as some of the problems that we're facing today, what needs to be done to solve this problem, as well as giving an example of a microcosm, so Washington State University, and how I'm using this to continue my plan for the next 2 years, and some of the challenges that I've been facing. Okay, so about me, Alyssa from Alaska. So like I said, I'm originally from North Pole, Alaska. Some things that you might not know about me: I'm a private pilot, I live on an airstrip, I'm a fishing guide during the summer, and almost everywhere I've been, I've lived in a rural area. So for the first half of my life, I was a military brat. We've lived in Florida, Ohio, Utah, and Alaska. And all of those places have something in common. I was always in a rural area. So I really fully understand this from a national perspective. And like I said, I'm a civil engineering student at Washington State University. But I'm also studying ethics. And I'm a person who really likes to fix things, whether that's something mechanical or a road, or even something on a social justice level. So this cause made sense to me. All right, some background. So my mother was born and raised on the Nez Perce Indian Reservation in Idaho and Washington. Every summer we would go back and visit this area, and I used to think that it was really, really cool how this place seemed to be kind of stopped in time. It was so rural. The people seemed to take pride in the land, but also as I grew older, I realized how poor this area was and how the people there were living kind of a diminished quality of life. And I didn't really realize why until very recently. And one of the main issues is that they're paying so much for this energy that just doesn't really fit in with their lifestyle. Secondly, like I've said, I've got this Alaska background. I consider Alaska my home. I love it. And I want to do something for my community and my state and the region that really built me. When I was a sophomore in high school, I became the Golden Valley Energy Association student representative, which meant that I was selected as the representative from my borough to go around Alaska and talk with other energy officials and other energy representatives, as well as students and leaders from all over the Pacific Northwest. And we kind of talked about what are you guys doing in your areas, or what is your energy cooperative or energy utility doing in those areas. And I realized that Alaska has this great deficit. There's no clean energy there at the moment, or very, very little. So that was something that kind of shocked me, and I realized there's potential for this. And lastly, this doesn't really seem related, but when I was a junior in high school, I joined the Youth Health Service Corps. So we worked with patients, and I saw firsthand how many students and how many elderly people had respiratory issues, childhood asthma, and things like that. And as time went on, I realized there's definitely a correlation between the kind of energy that we use in Alaska and these health effects. So with that, let me introduce you to my home, rural Alaska. This is actually on the southeast, which is a little further away. But the cost of living in Alaska is the second in the nation. It's incredibly high. The reliability of getting transportation or getting any kind of supplies to these areas is very, very difficult. Most of the small towns have less than 300 people in them, so that's incredibly small. Think about how many people are here in Mount Vernon today. Thousands. Over 15% of Alaskans live in these small villages, so it is a very large population. And there's these similar problems both in the towns and in these very, very small villages. 20% of the population spends over 50% of their paycheck every year, their family income, on just heating their homes. So imagine if you make $50,000, you're spending $25,000 of it every year just to make sure that your house is heated for your family. There's a bunch of different things that you need to spend money on: healthcare, education, transportation. And if you're spending 50% of that just to heat your home, you can't spend those on the other things that are important. So I realized that this is seriously a problem. Lastly, only 1/3 of Alaska is accessible by roads, and of those roads, only 30% of them are even paved. So it's very difficult to get supplies in and out, and it's very expensive, which wood and oil are two of the things that are the main imports to these villages and places. Okay, so we've kind of talked about why, but why do I think now is the time to do this? Like I've said, these people are living in impoverished areas, and there needs to be a change to happen. The health effects are serious, and the health effects are not just happening to the people of today, but will affect the future generations. Clean air in North Pole, my hometown, this is actually a picture of the energy factory that's right next door to me. And the air quality index is worse than Beijing. People think in Alaska that the air is clean, that it's a good place to live. If we're having this kind of issues, it's really not, and there needs to be something to happen there. Secondly, opportunity. I want the people of my town, my community, and even the Pacific Northwest and all rural parts of America to have the same opportunity that others do. As well as this is a global issue. This kind of pollution doesn't just affect the people around them, but it affects the whole world. There also needs to be some direction and cohesion. There are some environmental groups in Alaska and all over the United States, but there's no specific coalition and no specific collaboration between these groups. So that's one thing that I want to focus on. And lastly, rural America seems to be kind of in a slump. So how do we get these people to progress? And one of the main ways to do this is through energy. Also, this is just a quick pie chart that shows the utility companies, how exactly they're making their energy. So as you can see, there's a little bit of hydro, which is good, but there's no solar, there's very little geothermal, and there's actually no wind power either, which are all places that are untapped. So coal is incredibly dirty in a lot of cases, as well as gas, petroleum. I guess just gas and petroleum's on that one. But they're all pollutants. Okay. So what do I want to do about this? Again, reliable, affordable, and responsible energy. So what do those definitions mean exactly? Reliability just breaks down into getting the people what they need when they need it. So transportation, supplies, and self-sufficiency. Affordability, lowering the cost so they can have a better standard of living. And responsibility. This is kind of a tough word, but basically it means that we need feasible and renewable sources. Okay, and how am I going to do this? I want to focus on three main areas: education, grassroots collaboration, and policy changes. So education, at least in the state of Alaska, there's a unified curriculum that when you're in 4th and 5th grade, you learn about the environment and environmental sciences. I want to implement a very hands-on and experiential component to this curriculum that says, basically, this is possible, this is an issue, and inspiring young students to start thinking about these problems. Second, grassroots collaboration. So getting people of a community concerned about this and on the same page, as well as grass tops collaboration. So getting local governors, mayors, leaders in general on the same page, making sure that their constituents know that this is an issue and realizing that they can do something about it. And lastly, policy changes both on a local and small level as well as on a national level eventually. Okay, so who's affected by this? Obviously, the people that are living in these areas. Their quality of life will improve greatly if we get this through. Secondly, local, state, and national economies. If people can spend even 20% more of that paycheck on something else, then the communities will continue to flourish. And lastly, this is a global impact, as I've said. Every single person deals with or is affected by pollution in some way or another. Okay, so now the microcosm that I've been working on for the last 2 years, Washington State University. Localized and similar to my large goal. It's a very rural community, so they know that this is a problem. It's a progressive population. Pullman, Washington, which is where my school is located, the average age is 22 years old. So this is a very young community, and it's a very open and progressive community. As well as this is a... Okay, so and again, I want to focus on education, changing policy, and collaboration between groups. So education. I'm the undergraduate representative for the CIRIO, which is the Center for Environmental Research, Education, and Outreach. And this past, which talks about the environment, particularly in the local level. And one of the things that I want to implement for the next year and the year after that is having a specific component that talks about energy and the effects of it in that area, as well as having guest speakers. So every month there's someone that comes in that talks about environmental issues. This coming year we'll have 4 speakers that will particularly talk about rural issues. So I'm really excited about that. And lastly, on-campus awareness. So having demonstrations or actual models of things that you can do, or at least creating awareness. Collaboration. So there's a long list of groups here that all kind of seem to have similar things in common. They all care about the environment, and there's all of these groups have specific smaller units inside of them that are concerned about energy and clean energy. So getting them to work together on initiatives and getting them all on the same page. And lastly, policy changes. Divestment is a huge thing on the East Coast. On the West Coast, there's only 2 schools right now that even consider divestment. Particularly what I'm focusing on this next year is getting the staff and faculty's retirement checks not to be invested in oil, but at least for them to have the option to invest in a clean energy company or something along those lines. Lastly, clean energy initiatives. So having our university promote things like solar energy on campus or more self-sustaining energy. And lastly, pressure on administration. So petitions, or at least getting them to realize that this is a real problem and students are concerned about it and want to see a change. Okay, so for the next 2 years, I really want to focus on learning more about what other places have done to make this successful, and learning about how I can change or change some of the policies or procedures that have been done in other areas for my community. Secondly, education, which I've already talked about a little bit, collaboration and policy proposals, all on the small scale of Washington State University. Long-term outcomes. Again, I really, really would like to get reliable, affordable, and responsible energy for all over rural America. This actually is a small house in Canada. And as you can see, it's got solar panels on it, so it's pretty self-sufficient. That doesn't mean that we're going to completely block out other forms of energy. As you can see, they have an oil barrel and I've got a little thing there, and firewood. But at least they're augmenting their energy supply, and they're not having to cost as much. I also want this to be an investment for the future. Okay, so my action plan. So as I've said, the next 2 years, I'm really focusing on Washington State University, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and getting the word out there, as well as getting some more feedback. After that, I want to focus on Alaska and Washington as a whole, and after that, hopefully across the entire Pacific Northwest. I'm really focused on solar energy, and that's what I really want to focus all my efforts towards. Some challenges. Obviously, I'm 20 years old. I don't know everything. I'm still learning. I have a lot of commitments on my plate right now, but this is something that I truly feel passionate about. So kind of going with the next steps of that. Secondly, the geographic and social differences among regions, both in Alaska and across the United States. And economic resistance. There's going to be a lot of resistance from oil companies as well as from individual communities who have relied on this energy for so long. So getting that to a place where we can work together. And exactly what success looks like for me. Honestly, at this point, any change would be a step in the right direction. I'm at a place where small battles are great, and small successes are great as well. I have this big plan, and I want to see change, but even if it's at the very small level right now, that will be successful. I want to get people interested and excited and invested in this. As well as I want to pave the path for next generation. So that goes back to educating the lower or the younger students and the younger people in my community. And I really want to have them take on this cause for themselves and progress it in the future. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and thank you very much. If you guys have any questions. Mark?
To what extent does the climate of Alaska complicate renewable energy sources such as solar and wind?
Definitely. Well, that is a big challenge, particularly for solar. In some parts of Alaska, it's only sunny about half of the year. However, there are different battery options, and as technology progresses, we'll be able to use those more and more. And this is kind of an augmentation phase right now. So I'm not saying, you're going to completely get rid of firewood or completely get rid of coal, but start from there and head in the right direction. Done?
Thanks for this. This was great. You put together a great case and mission. You highlighted collaboration.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking at the groups on the slide, and I would just encourage you to keep the private sector, the local businesses around Washington State, like whether they're solar or energy efficiency or whatnot, try to bring them in, because you'd be surprised how much I think the university might like building those relationships too. But just so that the collaborative tent or the coalition is as broad as possible.
Definitely. Yeah, thank you. Yes?
So Washington State has to be far beyond Alaska as far as these initiatives, correct?
Yes.
And then how much do Alaska residents get as far as that energy kickback, whatever, every year?
Well, so that was only a 2-year program that they implemented, and it was about $1,000, which sounds like a lot, but for an average household home, the average energy bill is at least $1,200 a month. So it's very expensive.
Sure, but that's not happening anymore?
It's not. Certain communities have kind of it really just depends on the region, but for most of Alaska, that's not really an option right now.
Okay, so maybe that's not as much of a problem as I thought it might be.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Helen?
So one of the problems that young environmentalists often find is people say, oh, they're just tree huggers and we really take them seriously. And environmentalism isn't really for me because I'm a small business owner, or these other things are more important. So how will you help people to see that this is something that's important to everyone and it's not just for people who are like animal lovers?
Definitely. That's a question that I've really been struggling with. But I think that everyone can grow from this, or can at least, like small businesses can definitely improve from this. So kind of putting it in an economic standpoint and not just from a personal standpoint or emotional standpoint, but actually showing them the facts that you'll save money, you'll have more customers, people will be happier, people will buy more things. So that's a way that I'm hoping to incorporate a large group of people.
Are the reservations, such as the one that your mom grew up on, part of your children's plan event?
At the moment, not yet. That's something that I want to go into in the future, but right now there's a lot of different reasons, both politically as well as just feasibility-wise, that are difficult to deal with. So at least right now I'm very much starting on a small scale and going with what I know, and then later on hopefully extending to those communities. Amanda?
I know you mentioned your school and the many things you're involved with there. So when you head back to school in the fall, do you have something that you're going to be looking to try and do kind of in the immediate or start working on? And you talk about divestment. I'm just interested to hear kind of what in your head your first steps might be.
Definitely. A lot of the things that I talked about are already in place with Cerio and the 3-course class, but we're definitely interested in divestment. Right now we're starting with the administration, so I actually have meetings when I go back, working on at least divesting from coal, and later on from a 10-year plan, and working on a 10 and 20-year plan to divest completely from dirty energy. So, anything else? All right, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Just going the right way. Am I going backwards?
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go. Okay, let me get out of the light. Hi everybody, my name is Maddie Vorva. I am a student at Pomona College studying public policy and environmental analysis. I'm so excited to be here with you. Thank you for coming. My capstone project is really a long time coming. We're going to start back when I was a 7th grader. For this specific capstone project, I'm working with a nonprofit organization called Roots and Shoots on creating a conservation curriculum surrounding rainforests. But in order to explain my why and why I'm so passionate about these issues, we're going to start back with 7th grade me. Looking at this picture, I'm reminded of just how shy I was, just how much of an introvert I was. I joined a new school. I was homeschooled before this, and thankfully I met my best friend Rhiannon at this school, and we decided to work together to earn our Girl Scout Bronze Awards project, which was really just a service learning hour requirement. I look to my lifelong hero, Dr. Jane Goodall, for inspiration. I really admired her because she didn't have a college degree, but she had this passion for animals. And in 1960, she went to Tanzania and studied chimpanzees and really redefined how we view the animal kingdom and our relationship to it. And so since then, she has become a conservationist and United Nations Messenger of Peace. And so inspired by her work, I decided that my Bronze Award project was going to be about another great ape, the orangutan. I learned that their native habitat is in Indonesia and Malaysia, and that they're a critically endangered species, primarily because their rainforest habitat is being cleared for palm oil plantations. And in fact, 40 million acres have been burned, peatland as well, for these palm oil plantations. I learned that Indonesia is the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world because of the burning of these peats and forests. And one day, I had a sleepover with Rhiannon, and I was scrolling through these pictures of dead orangutans who had entered palm oil plantations in search of food and who were brutally killed by workers because they were considered as pests. And I really vividly remember this moment. I just sat there crying because I was shocked that this was happening. Palm oil is in a lot of the products that we eat every single day, and I couldn't believe that my personal purchasing choices were impacting the species on the other side of the world. And so I decided that if no one was going to speak up, it was going to be my job. And you know, coming from a really shy personality, this took a lot of courage for me, but I was able to do it because I wasn't talking about myself. I was talking about an issue that was much bigger than me. I would later learn that unsustainable palm oil production is not just a conservation issue. It's very closely tied to human rights. I later traveled to Colombia and Myanmar and Cambodia to learn about the complexities of land grab issues, of human trafficking, of child and slave labor on these plantations. So, another embarrassing middle school picture for you. This campaign really started small. It was just an awareness project. I went in with this handmade poster board presentation into schools in the Ann Arbor community. I talked with my peers. I had palm oil free bake sales. I had Save the Orangutan themed dances. Wasn't the cool kid, but my first presentation, I was laughed off the stage of my 6th through 12th grade school, and the newspaper the following week, the front page was like a spoof off of the presentation, which was a bummer, but it's okay, because I proved them all wrong, as you'll find out. So one day, it was Girl Scout cookie season, and I had sold cookies since 1st grade. And I flipped over a box and checked the ingredients label as it had become habit, and there it was, palm oil. And I was shocked because this is an organization that I'm really proud of and that I grew up in. And so 7th grade Maddie thought I was just going to call the Girl Scouts or send an email, and clearly they just hadn't heard about palm oil. They, switched to another oil. They just didn't know, like it was an ignorance issue. It wasn't that it was economically difficult to make these decisions. I sent that email. This turned into a 7-year campaign. It took 5 years to even get a meeting with the organization, and so I really grew up doing this project. So the first person in the environmental movement to support my campaign was Jane Goodall herself. I joined her organization Roots and Shoots, which she founded in 1992 in Tanzania with a local group of high school students who were noticing issues in their community and who wanted to do something about them. And so today the organization is in over 130 different countries. In the United States alone, there are 13,000 students who are involved. And the model of the program is working with facilitators, teachers, students, look at their communities, they map human, animal, and environmental needs, and they work together to create an action plan. This is a picture of the 7th grade trip to Chicago where she signed my petition. She wore a Save the Orangutan wristband that I had designed, which I thought was pretty cool. And she was the first person in the environmental movement to really say, Maddie, like, you are completely capable of doing this, and that really meant everything to me. And so I'll get into this a little bit more about how I grew this campaign from a really small initiative to a national and international platform. But by 2011, my life changed. I was a sophomore in high school. After working with a lot of different social and environmental organizations, this story was featured in the front page of the Wall Street Journal, Time, ABC, CBS, all over the place. And what this really allowed me to do was to take something as iconic and well-loved as the Girl Scout cookie and connect it to an issue on the other side of the planet. And so it was really nerve-wracking, and it took a lot of confidence to get up there and try and convince people to care about this issue. I had 3 minutes in some of these interviews, but I was so grateful for that opportunity, and I was prepared for it because I was talking about these issues in my middle school for years beforehand. So ultimately what happened in 2011, the Girl Scout organization did adopt a deforestation, they adopted a palm oil policy, which was the first change in the organization's 100-year history ever driven directly by girls. So that was really exciting. Unfortunately, the organization didn't change where their palm oil was coming from. They decided to offset their use of palm oil instead. And for them, it was more of a PR initiative. So it was all about keeping up appearances. And so they put this logo on the back of every single cookie box, which if you buy today, you'll see. And in my opinion, it's really misleading because consumers read sustainability and they assume that the issue has been taken care of. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Thankfully, I didn't give up with the campaign, and the nonprofit partners that I worked with didn't give up either. And we rallied hundreds of thousands of consumers through online social media actions and petitions. And eventually Kellogg, which is a baker of the Girl Scout cookies, they adopted a deforestation-free policy for their entire supply chain in 2014, which was really exciting to actually get a policy change that I felt good about. Later, the following year, Cargill and Wilmar, which are the 2 largest suppliers and traders of palm oil in the world, adopted these guidelines. And now, pretty much every month, all the major consumer companies are adopting policies and following suit. So my favorite part of this whole project has been to get in front of kids in hospitals and classrooms and through Skype calls, hanging out with other Girl Scouts and saying I was in your shoes once, and I know what it feels like to be in middle school. I know what it feels like to be made fun of for being passionate about something. But you can do it, and I think serving as an example and saying I started really small with something I cared about, and you can create a policy change that is much, much bigger than yourself, is hopefully empowering. And so I work to create a youth advocacy curriculum and website. I've also worked with zoos and museums across the country to design rainforest conservation curriculum. This is a picture at the Indianapolis Children's Zoo. They had an orangutan exhibit opening, and I was fortunate to be in the exhibit. So last year was Jane Goodall's 80th birthday party, and this was a wonderful event that I was invited to go to. Google hosted it in San Francisco, and I got to stand up in front of her and her friends and supporters and thank her for shaping the entire course of my life. I would not be who I am today without this project and without her initial support. And it also allowed me to say goodbye to this campaign that was such a huge part of my life, but transitioning into college, the policy change finally happened, and I'm trying to figure out sort of who I am now. And so the campaign really got to go full circle. And so that's why my Capstone project, my new why, is help empowering other young kids. And I think the most beautiful part of being 11 years old is that you're naive enough to think that you can actually change the world. And if I knew back then what I know now about the complexities of conservation, I don't know if I would have started this project. And we need whistleblowers. We need kids to raise their hands and say, this is wrong, and I must do something about it. And so these are just kids all over the world. These kids go to an international school in Singapore. These are kids in Colombia. These are kids in California who all are just as passionate about animals as I was when I was their age. So working with Roots and Shoots on their 25th anniversary campaign, which will launch in February. It's surrounding forest conservation. The mission is to help students understand the primary threats to forests worldwide and how their actions on can make a difference locally and globally for conservation. So there are 4 different campaign components that I'm working on. This project is really in its beginning phases, but these are the big ideas. So the Global Forest Watch is a nonprofit organization that works with Google. They have an open data platform where you can go to this website and you can take a base layer of a tropical country and put on different characteristics. So this is Indonesia. You can see right here is the lesser ecosystem, which is the last remaining habitat for Sumatran orangutans. The green layer is forest cover, and then the pink that you see is palm oil concessions. And so I really want students to understand that conservation is not just about a single species, it's not just about human rights, it's about the complexities and intersections of these 3 things. The next piece is a computer game. I took a class at Harvey College last semester, and my professor worked with a group of students to create a game where students, it's a role-playing game where they enter an indigenous community and they hear about the decision-making process of local communities in managing their forest communally. And so I think it's really important for students to understand kind of their appropriate role in conservation because it is an international issue. I didn't understand that my campaign was political until I made a comment, and in an NPR article, the Malaysian palm oil minister completely called me out and was like, this kid has no idea what she's talking about. And he was right. Like, what role is it for me to tell a country to develop or to not to develop? We almost lost our redwoods when we were building our railroads. And so understanding the political complexities is really important to me, and I hope that this game can help students understand the local challenges of forest conservation on the ground. The next piece that I'm really passionate about, because this is my beginning, was conscious consumption. I think students need to see how their daily purchases have these global impacts. I went to the grocery store with my mom every day whenever she had to pick something up, and I looked. I would make lists and lists and lists of everything that had palm oil in it, and palm oil is an ingredient in 50% of the products in our grocery stores. So if you like Kit Kats, if you like Oreos, pretty much any sweetened food, processed food, it's going to have palm oil in it. And so I want kids to recognize that they can tell these companies and have a conversation with these companies surrounding their policy. A fun story. Part of my challenge with my campaign is how do I actually measure impact, because it hasn't been about raising money necessarily for conservation. It's more about getting consumers to embrace their role in telling companies what they want. And how do you measure that? You can say, like, okay, I maybe reached 1,000 people because there are a certain number of comments on this article, but I want to see like a cultural shift, which is difficult and takes a really long time. But it was kind of cool to read. So like the palm oil issue was a question on Jeopardy, for example. So that was kind of a fun way to see, like, wow, this is in Americans' minds. I wouldn't have guessed, but that's cool. Another sign was on the front page of the New York Times. There was an article about how the Rockefeller family divested from fossil fuels. And Valerie Rockefeller was quoted, and she said, you know, environmental conservation is a really important family value to us. My little daughter won't give me a kiss on the lips when I'm using lipstick that has palm oil in it. And so I'm really hoping that by educating kids, we can influence our parents' purchasing decisions, no matter who your parent is. And so the last component of the campaign is going back to Roots and Shoots community mapping model, which assumes that kids are smarter than we give them credit for, and they're completely experts in their community. They're making observations. And so whether these kids are really little and they take a blank sheet of paper and their school is the center and they observe the human, animal, and environmental characteristics and resources, or high school students can do this. This is a map of Costa Rica in San Jose. Students were doing this. Just taking stock of the distribution of community resources and asking questions of why, for example, does this neighborhood have a green space and this doesn't? And so tailoring their model specifically for forest conservation. I want students to understand basic ecology, learn about ecosystem services. I want them to learn about invasive species, and if there's an actual community need, then do a tree planting. So the learning outcomes, these are kind of 3 broad lessons that I learned from components. I want kids to learn the importance of identifying community of engaging with the people behind the policies. So, just some examples. All the logos you see on the screen are different nonprofit partners that I worked with. And so, yes, it started with orangutan conservation. That was my initial passion. But as I grew up, it became so much more. And so I worked with human rights organizations and communities who are interested in reducing greenhouse gases and therefore preventing deforestation, and working with the Rainforest Action Network, which works on forest issues. So I want students to know that there are nonprofit organizations in their own communities who are already addressing these issues. There's no need to reinvent the wheel, but there is a need to become involved and to share a different perspective. This is a woman who I deeply admire. Her name is Jan McAlpine. She was the United Nations Director of the Forum on Forests. In 2011, I was honored by the United Nations as a forest hero, which was really exciting because I got to stand in front and with leaders who have spent their entire lives dedicated to these issues. And so she sat me down, and I really was super idealistic, even now, but she said, if you're going to be talking about these issues, you need to understand the political ramifications of your statements. And she said, Maddie, you can't put a fence around the forest. There's no saving a forest. We're always going to be dealing with land use issues. We have an increasing population. We have to feed people. So how are you actually going to engage within the system? And coming from such a black and white approach to my conservation, that's a lesson that I want to pass on to other kids, is you have to work within reality. Also, Jan was someone who had a really similar experience to me. She was from Michigan. I want students to see leaders in their own communities who look like them, who have the same background and same experiences. The environmental movement needs to be accessible to all, and I feel like oftentimes it isn't. And I don't want kids who are involved in Roots and Shoots to think that Jane Goodall is the only kind of activist that you can be. There's so many different forms of being an advocate, and it's not always about being on a world stage. It's about the daily hard work of going in and doing the dirty work in your community and making sure that you're doing something that you care about. And so the last bit is the difference between advocacy and boycotting. So like I said, I really saw these issues in a stark way. When I created my first petition in 7th grade, it was boycott the cookies until the palm oil is removed. And that's just not practical. Palm oil is never going to disappear. It's the wideliest used vegetable oil in the world. And I could go into that, but I'm not going to waste your time. But it's cheap, it's available, it has high yields, it's going to be in our food system. And so Jane actually changed the language on the petition and said, unless it's from a sustainable plantation. And so she really planted that seed in my mind of, okay, how am I going to work within the industry to help design these deforestation-free standards? And so instead of calling for a cookie boycott, which I had originally planned to do, I decided to create a Rainforest Hero Badge. So hundreds of scouts across the country were learning about the rainforest connection between palm oil, and they were wearing the badge on the back of their vests in support. I also had this puzzle piece campaign where younger scouts were decorating blank puzzle pieces, explaining why it's important to protect our rainforests. And I was able to present these pieces, there were like thousands of them, to the Girl Scout organization when we finally got to sit down and meet with them. And that was a great feeling, just to say there are so many of your members who care about this issue and who I'm representing. So in terms of people behind the policies, I think kids, and I was intimidated at first, sometimes I still am intimidating when you walk into a boardroom or a government office and you have 15 minutes to make your big pitch. But they are just people, and these are just different pictures recognizing that kids really do need to speak up. In my experience, working with Kellogg, for example, they weren't open to speaking with our nonprofit experts, so it was my job to actually have the information to present it to them. For them, it was just more of a PR effort. They would say, we met with Maddie and Rihanna, and they call the press, they tell them that. And so I took my responsibility really seriously. This is a picture of me in Japan from last November. I was working on UNESCO's Education for Sustainable Development curriculum and working with adults and saying, like, this could work in a classroom, this couldn't work in the classroom. This is a picture of me meeting with Lisa Jackson, who is the then president of the EPA. This was a really important meeting because at the time the EPA was deciding on whether or not to list palm oil as a biofuel and support it in that way. It shouldn't be. The amount of carbon emissions that happen for burning these forests are worse in terms of carbon emissions than petroleum. And so it's interesting how environmental issues are so complicated and how people assume, like, oh, it must be renewable because it's a plant, like the palm oil tree can regrow, but the process of actually getting that plantation on the ground is pretty destructive. The last bit, this is a picture of me in front of the White House. Michelle Obama is the honorary president of the organization, as all first ladies are, and so more about strategy, how to effectively get your campaign out there. This picture went everywhere. And so really, I think it's so important for kids to speak up and be at the forefront of these conversations, and that's what I hope this Capstone project will do. And so this is a lot to summarize. It's been 8 years in my life, but I've had an opportunity to do that at Mount Vernon these past 5.5 weeks. This is a picture of me with my brothers when we visited. I was probably like 8. And I really remember walking in the woods and just thinking what a cool place this was. And this will definitely be a home that I come back to and share with people who are special to me. And so I want to thank you guys for making this opportunity available to students. And I want to thank my fellows for being wonderful. And thank you. So if you have any questions, let me know. Yeah.
Thank you for that fascinating and self-reflective talk. As a fellow anthropologist, I love Jane Goodall
Cool.
as well. She's definitely a hero. And I would love to hear about how your platform or your thinking about your Capstone project was affected by your time here at Mount Vernon and meeting with the different people and sort of experiencing Mount Vernon. I'm
definitely still digesting everything, really. Like, there's so much that I've learned. I've just mostly been reinvigorated by being here. I know that sounds like a soft answer. I don't have exact curriculum adjustments yet. I'm still thinking, and I want to go back looking at some of like the strategic planning and the logic models that we did in the classroom, seeing how I can tailor them to younger students to help them plan more effective service projects. What I was talking about was more about the conservation mindset that I want kids to have, but it is their job to come up with a service learning project that they're personally passionate about. So it could be about consumption, it could be about tree planting, but just being reminded that leadership is necessary and it doesn't have to be entirely exhausting, and that there were people who truly dedicated themselves, like GW, to something much bigger than himself without immediate rewards. That was what I needed kind of at this point, because I've spent a lot of time, and to be refreshed and to go back and do what I do, knowing that there are peers who care just as passionately about these topics as I do, is really the biggest takeaway that I had.
inspiring, and it almost has this like fairy tale like storybook quality where you have a little girl who sees a change that needs to happen and then ends up affecting the change and then going around the world trying to encourage others to do the same. But I'm sure that as with any kind of lifestyle that looks glamorous or picture perfect from the outside, there were things that were personally challenging for you.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you wouldn't mind, it would be interesting to hear about those aspects that you've grown as a person from.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It definitely shaped me entirely, this campaign. I think just learning how to let go. For the first 5 years, the campaign was just within my community. Once I started working with these nonprofit organizations, it was about compromise. And that was hard because it was something that I really put my whole heart in, I had control of, and suddenly I didn't get to make those decisions. And I would, check my email, and before I had the chance to look over something, an email would be blasted out to our supporters with my name signed, and that was just really invasive to me. Or I'd be sitting in math class, sophomore year, and I'll never forget this, getting a call from Fox saying, we need a comment, we need a press release right now, or you're not going to be commented in this story. I didn't know what a press release was. And so I had like a 30-minute media training call before suddenly I was spending every other week in and out of New York, in and out of DC to run this campaign. So it really, I missed out on like normal high school things, which is a bummer. But that's okay because it was worth it. And then also like getting to work with your role models and heroes and understanding that they're people just like you, just like the whole people behind the policies, that no one is perfect and that role models aren't untouchable and that there are real personal costs to activism and dedicating your life to these issues. You only have a certain amount of time. And so that was important to balance and not become burnt out, which eventually I was. But this, yeah. That was the rant, but thank you for asking that question. Anyone else? Yeah.
So I'm always interested to hear this story. Every time I hear it, I'm really inspired. But so your project obviously was very large, and you didn't realize how large it was when you were 11. And you're working with kids now to try and help them make meaningful change in their community. So how do you think you can help them understand that you can do small things that have real impact?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, at 11, 5 years is almost half your life. So how do you help them kind of keep some goal in mind that they might be able to reach and stay involved with, and try to make impact kind of on a level that they can engage with?
Yeah, definitely. I had this huge goal, but I had no idea how I was going to accomplish it, and being more realistic with students who aren't as crazy as I am and wanting to dedicate that much time to something. I think creating service projects, which is what the mapping model helps students with, that are implementable immediately, that you're working in your own community, planting trees, or creating an awareness campaign, learning how to write a letter to the editor, or running a palm oil-free bake sale. Those individual experiences are really rewarding because you can actually see the impact that you're making. And that's been one of the hardest things for me, is I haven't been to Indonesia yet. Like, these issues are deforestation, it's always going to happen, there's no quick fix. And so for students, service learning, like Mark was talking about, it's so rewarding. And so helping students at first understand the complexities of conservation, and then use the roots and shoots mapping models to actually look at a community need and help them create a project that they're passionate about, is what I want to focus on. Anything else?
For a group of students who are trying to affect big changes with our causes and everything, what kind of role did your support network or your interpersonal relationships play into the work that you ended up being able to do?
I mean, that was like everything. Like, I had my best friend for most of this journey who was right there alongside me, and she's the only person that grew up in this crazy way that I did, and so I was really lucky to have that for a while. Also, my mom, she wasn't involved in the campaign. She worked a lot. Both my parents are workaholics, but there was never any doubt in my mind that I could do this, because growing up, I heard over and over again, you can achieve anything you set your mind to do. And so I believed that, and I had that confidence, and so that was so important. And then there have been just magical people who have come into my life and been supportive of the campaign and supportive of me, and that's like how I ended up at Pomona College, was through a benefactor of sorts who's just an exceptional person and decided to help me out. So people just accumulated. I guess people are drawn to the project and drawn to the passion. So that will happen with you guys too. When you are genuine enough and vulnerable enough to share your campaigns with others, people will just gravitate to that. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the advice that you hope that the younger children, like in elementary school and middle school, you hope that they feel like getting started.
Mm-hmm.
So I was curious to what kind of advice you would give to your fellow fellows as we're kind of starting our journey, but at a later age when there are different expectations because we are children.
Yes. Being realistic and not setting yourself up with too big of goals, like breaking your goals into like parts that are actually achievable, because you could spend 8 years on a single policy change like I did, or it could actually work out, which would be great. But you never know. You never know when you're starting these issues. And so I think just being honest with yourself about what you can feasibly and can't, and also being willing to ask for help. And I had to learn that. I'm still learning that. Finding partnerships, finding other students who care just as much about these issues, that you don't have to do it all by yourself. That was integral to my success. And finding people who have the answers when you don't have them is, finding experts. You have to, like, you guys are all tackling pretty challenging issues, really challenging issues, and you're not going to have all the answers. And admitting that you're only 20 years old, and that there are people who have been struggling with the same issues for their entire careers and still don't have the answers, I think it's good to just remember that, and to continually search for people who have the patience to educate you. Yeah.
Maddie, that was fantastic. Wow, very impressive. Kind of along the lines of the first question you got, I wondered to what extent, if someone asked you sometime next year about this program, so the Mount Vernon Leadership Fellows program, you were involved in it, why would I want to do that? How would you answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still reflecting, but I was really curious when I came here. Like, the website was pretty vague. Like, talked to Amanda and Abby about this. I had no idea what I was signing up for, but I was like, I want to see if they can do it. Like, I want to see if they can take college students and in 6 weeks help them come up with an action plan, because I'm passionate about helping other kids do things realistically and manageably, and I think you guys have done a good job. So, so you have my support, and I think like you. You guys have been really open to you've been flexible enough to, the program has changed even week to week based on our feedback. And actually being heard by program coordinators, I've done like pretty much any leadership curriculum under the sun, is really refreshing. And I know that it's going to get better and better every time. And then also being on the estate and like speaking with people who are super passionate about their jobs and care about this place and love this place has made me love this place and like stay after hours and like go hiking and want to come back. And so I think the story and the heart is there, and that's what's going to keep me coming back. So that was a long-winded answer, but that's why. Okay, we good? Anyone else? Yeah, thank you.
Is it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, cool. Thank you. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Lily Philbrick. I'm from Manchester, Massachusetts, just outside of Boston. I go to Skidmore College, where I study economics and international affairs. And my project is on the Jordan water crisis and how I can potentially solve it with rainwater harvesting. So I'm just going to start with an overview of my presentation. So I'm going to define the problem and then go into my story and how I connect with this issue. Then I will describe why I'm choosing Jordan to work in first. The why, how, and what behind my cause, why rainwater harvesting as a potential solution, my logic model, action plan, and then defining my success. So the problem. There is no source of potable water in Jordan that can be relied on in the future. So Jordanians are very close to the point where they will turn on their taps and nothing will come out. I think we take our fresh water for granted here. I really do. And we have to realize that this is not the case. It's not the case in California, and definitely not the case across the world. So why I am related to this cause. So my cause is basically a fusion of geography and economics. And why I became passionate about those two things. So I became passionate about geography with this lovely group of people. This is my sophomore class in high school, my world history class. We traveled to South Africa together, and this is on the top of Table Mountain. And I fell in love with the geography of this country. It is absolutely beautiful, and I also learned how the geography of the country defined its history and how it can define its future. So this is a picture I took from Table Mountain. It is probably one of the favorite pictures I've ever taken, and it is just absolutely stunning. I just love the geography of this country. And for my final project in this class, I chose to do a project on the Salem witch trials, very close to home. And I also realized that the geography of Salem actually defined who was accused and who wasn't. And it was a huge definer in that sense as well. So why I became passionate about economics. When I was 5 years old, I was walking on the streets in Boston, and I saw a homeless woman, and it was the first time I really understood how her life was different from mine. I asked my parents why she was sitting there with a cup asking for change, and they said that she couldn't afford food, water, clothes, let alone a home. And I was so deeply saddened by this. I went to a sandwich shop down the street, bought her a sandwich, and gave it to her, and I can still remember how grateful she was for that, and her toothless smile when I gave it to her. So this ties into a class I took this year. My professor, one of my economics professors, he said that economics is the study of who is eating, who isn't, and why. And this, I immediately thought of my 5-year-old self giving this sandwich to this homeless woman. Like, why was I able to eat and she wasn't? And so this is directly related to my project: who gets clean water, who doesn't, and why. So that is why I am looking into this cause. So the Earth is actually covered over 75% in water. However, only 3% of that water is fresh water. And unfortunately, less than 1% of that fresh water is accessible to humans. Most of that fresh water is locked up in glaciers, which are melting from global warming into the ocean and will never be able to be fresh water again. Also, most of the fresh water is in aquifers so deep down that we can't reach them. So why Jordan? Jordan is the fourth poorest country in the world in terms of water resources. Also, the population is rapidly increasing due to influx of refugees from Palestine, Syria, and Iraq from the surrounding area. Also, the geography of the country is a huge determinant in this. They do have one major river, the Jordan River. However, it is very small compared to most major rivers in the world. It is only 156 miles long, which is roughly the distance between Albany and New York City, so about 2.5-hour drive. And also, it is only flowing about 2% of its historic volume, so it barely reaches the Dead Sea where it ends. Also, Jordan is an arid climate, but I will describe to you why it is possible to use rainwater harvesting in an arid climate and be able. And one of my long-term goals is to spread the technique of rainwater harvesting throughout the Middle East. So this is a topographic map of the Jordan River. It starts on Mount Hermon in eastern Lebanon, runs down through Israel, just next Syria there, runs along the western border of Jordan and the West Bank, and ends in the Dead Sea. So as I mentioned before, it barely reaches the Dead Sea, let alone barely reaches Jordan. And so this is a very unreliable source of water for Jordan citizens. and they actually rely on this river for 75% of their water resources. So why it is not a suitable source for water in Jordan? Well, the river has drawn geopolitical conflict in the past centuries and in the past decades, has caused many wars and political tensions between a lot of countries. Also, as I mentioned before, it rarely reaches the Dead Sea. Also, the salination of the river is 3 times that of most fresh water. So it's really not good for irrigation and agriculture. Also, it is very uncertain if it will reach the Dead Sea, and with climate change, the snowpack at Mount Hermon, where the river starts, is getting less and less each year up in the northern part, and so it is very uncertain. So the why, how, and what behind my cause. So the why is the anecdotes that I shared with you earlier. How I'm going to do this, I want to drastically improve the quality of life for Jordan citizens by providing them fresh water. And I will do this through rainwater harvesting. So this is a picture that I borrowed from the Charity Water website. Charity Water is an organization that uses rainwater harvesting along with other techniques to access potable water, to provide access for potable water across the world. However, they are not working in the Middle East, so I want to reach out to them and know why they're not working in the Middle East, and I want to try to expand their efforts there. But anyways, this is a single home rainwater harvesting system. The rain falls onto the roof, into the gutter, down the pipes, and into the holding tanks. And so with these tanks, this method of rainwater harvesting could be really successful in Jordan. Because it is an arid climate, there is a lot of evaporation. So there is a method that uses open pools for rainwater harvesting, but using these holding tanks, we will be able to mitigate the evaporation and be able to capture the evaporation. All right, so why rainwater harvesting opposed to other options? So rainwater harvesting is actually very inexpensive. You can get a system like this for $50 or less. Also, you can make your own, basically. You just need gutters, a pipe to run into the holding tanks, and some holding tanks. You can also install a filter or a pump to pump it into your house. However, the rainwater in Jordan actually matches with the World Health Organization qualities for water, so you wouldn't really need a filter. Also, you can easily install them yourself, or I'm hoping the organizations that I work with will help install these systems in people's homes. So this is a precipitation map of Jordan. So along the western border and in the north, these are the rainiest parts of the country. This is the more arid section of the country, and so I hope to implement single home harvesting systems in the north and along the west here. And most of the major cities in Jordan do fall in this range, so the capital Amman is about right in there, and one of the other major cities, Petra, is down in here. And once I iron out all the complications and things with the single home systems, I want to implement a macro rainwater harvesting system. So this will be enormous holding tanks that will capture rainwater, and I hope to install it in this part of the country, and then install pipelines to run through the rest of the country, so people who do live in the arid regions will have access to this technology. All right, so onto my logic model that I referenced in my overview. So the inputs that I will need, or organizations I will need to work with, I think the Jordanian government will definitely be interested in this. This technology will save many lives, and it will mitigate that uncertainty and mitigate climate change for the aquifers that are running out, and so this will be an immediate access to potable water. There are efforts in Jordan that are repairing the old infrastructure, the old water infrastructure. However, those are attached to the river or attached to aquifers that are getting low or very close to running out. So they do need a new way to access potable water. Also, I want to work with nonprofits like Charity Water that I mentioned earlier. I think that nonprofits that not only work with potable water, but also related causes, such as women's education, women in the workforce. I think they will also be interested in this cause. A lot of the times, it's the women and girls of the household who travel 4 to 7 miles to go gather water for their household, and a lot of the times that water that they gather is highly contaminated. And so the time that they spend traveling to collect that water will be completely eliminated with rainwater harvesting, and they can reallocate that time to learning how to read and write, going to school, getting a job, so things like that. So I think organizations with causes similar to that will also be interested in my cause. I also want to work with GIS, Geographic Information System. It is basically a computer software system that layers maps, and I think it will be a great resource with this once I learn how to use it. And because I can use it to specifically locate a house, and it'll tell me how much rain that house gets throughout the year, and I can see how much rain that house can collect using a rainwater harvesting system, and how much water it can accumulate for the household to use. And obviously rainwater harvesting technology will be another input. So my outputs, definitely improved quality of life for Jordanians and refugees. This can work in single homes, it can work at refugee camps, it can work all over the country, and also potable water. So my audiences, this is a little bit of a recap, but obviously the citizens of Jordan will be my #1 audience, and then other countries suffering from poor water distribution can also learn from this. It's not so. So countries that are going through drought can't really use this technology because there is no rain, but it can definitely help with countries like Jordan that their rivers are running out or their aquifers are running out, or they just need help redistributing the water. This can definitely be a solution. And also the nonprofits I mentioned earlier. So my long-term and short-term outcomes. My long-term outcomes, obviously, improving the quality of life for these citizens in the Middle East, and just providing them access to clean water, as I mentioned earlier. And so once I install the macro harvesting system, and once I iron out all the kinks for that, I really want to expand to the rest of the Middle East. I originally wanted to start in Iraq because their water situation is almost as bad as Jordan. And they have even more conflict with ISIS and everything. However, because of that, it is very difficult for Americans to go in and work there. So that wasn't really feasible. So I decided to start in a safer country, and I want to start in Jordan. So in the short term, I really just want to get a better understanding of the problems, and of the challenges and the potential solutions. There's so many different things that go into this. The government, countries involved, refugees, there's so many different aspects that go into this. So I just want to better understand all of the characteristics in this. And also I want to develop a model using GIS. All right, so my action plan. My immediate work is just basically building my network. I need to reach out to more organizations and really get their feedback on my idea and refine my idea. And I also want to do further research in design systems. There isn't really such thing as a macro rainwater harvesting system out there, but I think it can be effective, and I think it is possible. So just doing further research on that. So my semester goal is I really want to perfect my idea, refine my idea, iron out all the details. And I also want to discuss implementation with organizations and get their feedback on it. And my long-term goal is to work with these nonprofits to expand their efforts to the Middle East. As I said before, there are a lot of organizations that do work with potable water and access to potable water throughout the world except the Middle East. So I want to know why that is and help expand their efforts to the Middle East. So defining my success. I will consider myself successful once I've discussed implementation with an organization. This is a huge problem to tackle, and I need to make small steps in order to get there. And so this is kind of my first step, just building my network and discussing my project with organizations. So thank you so much for listening. I would just like to thank Mount Vernon for this opportunity. It's such an honor to be here. And I'd also like to thank my mentor, Tom Patak, who can't be here today, but I know he's here in spirit. So thank you so much. And I am open to some questions. Yes?
I was curious if you could elaborate a little bit more on why you picked Jordan specifically, rather than, you mentioned California's having water problems, but also other countries you could have picked as well.
Well, I forgot to mention that I'm really academically interested in the Middle East. I'm learning Arabic, and I'm just really interested in the culture. I think their culture is completely different from ours, and I think it would be really interesting to work with that culture. And it's also very impoverished, and I think there are a lot of different ways that that area can be helped, and I think this is one of the ways that it can alleviate a lot of the stress put on the governments out there, because they are working with so many different issues like terrorism. So I think that this could really help that area of the world. Yeah. Yes, Amanda.
So this is so interesting to me, and this is obviously a really huge initiative, which is great. So thinking about going back to school and kind of starting in one place, I know you'd love to get some infrastructure in Jordan. What do you think kind of your first forays into this field might be to try and setting yourself up to accomplishing some of these larger goals?
Well, I definitely need to get feedback about my project from nonprofits who are the experts, like Maddie was saying. I really need to talk to the experts about this, and that's really my first step, and that's why I will deem myself successful if I do that. But a lot of organizations do implement rainwater harvesting around the world in similar countries in the Middle East. Well, not in the Middle East, but countries with a similar situation with countries in the Middle East. And so I think it is possible, and so I want to talk to them about the logistics and how they actually do it, and understand why they're not going to the Middle East, and see if it actually is feasible to go there. Any other questions? Yeah, Dr. Bradbury.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Are you planning to visit Jordan soon? Is that on the list of goals for the next year or so?
Yes, it is definitely one of my goals in the next couple of years. I just have to figure out how I'm going to get there. It would be amazing to work with an organization to go there and implement this. I was actually planning on going this fall. However, the program that I was going to go with canceled all their travel seminars, so that's no longer an option. But it definitely is, maybe next summer, definitely in the near future. So, anyone else? All right, well, thank you so much. Are you using this?
Yeah. We're going to take just a quick break as we wait for some other mentors to get here. So the next one will start, I think, at 3 o'clock. So I can text them and tell them I'm going to start early. If folks need to take a bio break, now's a great time to do that.
Need some jumping jacks.